let's get our meeting started. We have one bill hearing and then a number of bills we are hoping to work today. So to make sure we're moving right along, we'll get started with the hearing. I'll open the hearing on House Bill 2697, and we will have Natalie come up to give us an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2697 would make changes to the process for evaluating and treating people who are undergoing evaluation for competency to stand trial. And it would also allow that evaluation and treatment to be conducted at various appropriate facilities. Section 1 amends KSA 223302. That's the statute that governs proceedings to determine a defendant's competency to stand trial. That statute is amended to provide that an evaluation can be conducted in person or by electronic means while the defendant is in jail at a secure location or on pretrial release. Current law there provides that commitment to an institution shall not exceed 60 days. And then this bill would provide that prior to the termination of that 60-day period, the professional approved by the court to examine the defendant or the chief medical officer or head of a facility where the defendant is committed for inpatient examination would be required to certify whether the defendant is competent to stand trial. Section 2 amends KSA 223302. That's the statute that governs commitment of incompetent defendants. Under Subsection A, a defendant who's found to be incompetent would be ordered for evaluation and treatment conducted on an inpatient or outpatient basis. That evaluation may be ordered to be conducted outpatient, in person, or by the use of electronic means while the defendant is in jail, secure location, or on pretrial release. For a defendant charged with a misdemeanor, outpatient evaluation shall be ordered to be conducted by an appropriate psychiatric or psychological clinic or facility, mental health center, county institution or facility, or a private institution or facility. For those charged with a felony, outpatient evaluation and treatment may be ordered to be conducted by any of those entities that I just mentioned. For a defendant charged with a felony, a commitment to the state security hospital or state hospital can be conducted on an inpatient basis, or if the defendant meets the screening criteria on an outpatient basis. And at the commencement of outpatient treatment, the institution conducting that treatment would be required to notify the county or district attorney for purposes of providing victim notification. Subsection B provides that if a defendant is ordered to receive an evaluation and treatment on an outpatient basis by an appropriate psychiatric or psychological clinic or facility, mental health center, county institution or facility, or private institution or facility, the chief medical officer shall certify to the court within 90 days whether the defendant has a substantial probability of attaining competency in the foreseeable future. The court shall set that hearing for to happen within 21 days unless exceptional circumstances warrant delay. If the probability does exist, then the court would order the defendant to remain in jail or at their secure location on pretrial release or at another appropriate setting while the defendant attains competency, or for 6 months, whichever occurs first. If that probability does not exist, then the court would order the district attorney to commence involuntary commitment proceedings. The court shall issue an order for care and treatment within 21 days of receipt of that certification unless exceptional circumstances warrant delay. If a defendant who was found to have a substantial probability of attaining competency has not done so within 6 months, the court would then order the county or district attorney to commence involuntary commitment proceedings. The court would then have to, again, issue that order for involuntary care and treatment within 21 days unless exceptional circumstances warrant delay. Subsection C provides that if a defendant is ordered or met the criteria to receive an evaluation and treatment on an outpatient basis at the state security hospital or its agent, or the state hospital or its agent, then the chief medical officer would be required to certify to the court within 90 days whether that defendant, again, has a substantial probability of attaining competency. If, again, that probability does exist, the court would order the defendant to remain in jail or another appropriate setting until they do attain competency, or for 6 months, whichever occurs first. If that probability does not exist, then the court would order the county or district attorney or the secretary for aging and disability services to commence involuntary commitment proceedings. The court would have to issue that care and treatment order within 21 days. If the defendant who is found to have substantial probability of attaining competency does not do so within 6 months, the court would then order the county or district attorney or the secretary for aging and disability services to commence involuntary commitment proceedings. And that order would have to be issued within 21 days. Subsection D provides that if a defendant is ordered or met the criteria to receive evaluation and treatment on an outpatient basis, and the chief medical officer or head of an institution determines that the defendant's mental health condition or behavior warrants terminating outpatient treatment and commencing inpatient treatment, then the chief medical officer shall provide a report to the court within 10 days after outpatient treatment is terminated. And that report would also have to be provided to the chief medical officer of the state security hospital. The court would review any orders. The court would be required to issue any orders or warrants that would be required to facilitate the sheriff taking the defendant into custody and transporting them to the state security hospital or its agent, or a state hospital or its agent. The chief medical officer would then submit a report as to whether the defendant has attained competency within 90 days of the defendant's admission. The court, county or district attorney, defense counsel, and the head of an institution where the defendant would be receiving inpatient or outpatient services would be required to provide documentation to the inpatient treatment center to facilitate admission of that individual. Subsection E provides that if a defendant is charged with a felony, the court may order a defendant to receive inpatient evaluation and treatment at the state security hospital or its agent, the state hospital or its agent, or a county or private institution or facility after considering that defendant's mental condition. The chief medical officer shall certify to the court within 90 days after inpatient treatment whether they have a probability of attaining competency in the foreseeable future. If that probability does exist, then they shall order the defendant to remain until they attain competency or for 6 months, whichever occurs first. And if the probability does not exist, then the court would be required to order the county or district attorney or the secretary for aging and disability services to commence involuntary commitment proceedings. If a defendant who was found to have a substantial probability of attaining competency does not do so within 6 months, then the court would order the county or district attorney or the secretary for aging and disability services to commence involuntary commitment proceedings. And that care and treatment order would have to be issued within 21 days. In all cases of evaluation and treatment by one of those above entities, when reasonable grounds exist to believe a defendant who has been adjudged incompetent, the court shall conduct a hearing to determine that person's present mental condition. If the court does find that the defendant is competent, then the proceedings can resume. If a defendant committed to a public institution who is sentenced for a crime, they may be credited with any or all of that time in which the defendant was committed. Finally, subsection F provides that psychotropic medications may be prescribed for a defendant who is ordered or has met the criteria to receive evaluation and treatment on an inpatient or an outpatient basis. Psychotropic medications may be prescribed, ordered, and administered in conformity with accepted clinical practices. They shall be administered only on the written order of a physician or upon a verbal order that's noted in the defendant's medical record and subsequently signed by the physician. The attending physician would be required to regularly review the drug regimen of each defendant under their care. When a defendant is receiving psychotropic medications that alter the defendant's mental state in such a way as to adversely affect the defendant's judgment or hamper the defendant in preparing for or participating in a hearing, then for 2 days prior and during the hearing, the facility shall not administer that medication unless it's necessary to sustain the defendant's life or protect the defendant or others. Prior to the hearing, a report of all psychotropic medications that have been administered and a copy of any written consent signed by the defendant would be submitted to the court. Counsel for the defendant would be able to preliminary examine the physician regarding any medication within 2 days of the hearing. If the court determines that the medication or treatment has been administered that adversely affects the defendant's judgment, the court can grant the defendant a reasonable continuance to be able to better prepare for their hearing. The court shall order that medication or treatment be discontinued until the conclusion of the hearing unless the court finds the medication is necessary to sustain the defendant's life or protect the defendant or others. When a defendant who is receiving treatment under this section objects to taking the medication, and if they continue to object after a full explanation of the benefits and risks of the medication, then the medication may be administered over their objection. That objection would be required to be recorded in the defendant's medical record, and written notice shall be forwarded to the medical director of the treatment facility. Within 5 days after that notice is given, the medical director would be required to issue a written decision concerning the administration of that medication and then that decision would have to be in the patient's medical file. Section 3 amends KSA 22-3305 to provide that when a hearing is requested on whether the defendant has been restored to competency, that request has to be filed within 14 days of completion of the notification from the treatment facility. The hearing shall take place within 21 days unless exceptional circumstances warrant delay. Section 4 amends KSA 22-3428 to incorporate the changes made in the other sections that authorize these evaluations to be conducted at a wider range of appropriate facilities. And then finally, Section 5 amends KSA 22-3429. Current law there provides that if the defendant is convicted of a felony, the commitment shall be to a state security hospital or any suitable local mental health facility. If the defendant is convicted of a misdemeanor, the commitment would be to the state hospital or any other suitable local mental health facility. If adequate private facilities are available and the defendant is willing to pay for those expenses, then the commitment can be to a private hospital. This bill removes those current law provisions and provides that in all cases, the trial judge can order the defendant committed to the state security hospital for a mental examination, evaluation, and report. And I can take any questions.
Representative Humphries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have one quick question for you and then a question for Natalie. Will you remind us who introduced this bill on whose behalf?
So this came from KDADS.
Okay.
So from the agency itself.
Okay, thank you. Natalie, I think I, can pretty much figure out sections 3, 4, and 5, but, I'm not super familiar with KSA 22-3303. So can you, first, I think you're hoarse from reading all of that. You did a great job. But can you, what is the gist of this, of section 2? What is the big difference here than what we have now?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, Representative Humphries, and certainly the proponents should correct me if I'm wrong, but if you look at the current language there that's provided for, that we're kind of changing, right now, these defendants who are committed for evaluation and treatment are ordered to any appropriate state, county, private institution or facility. And so I believe the intent here is to allow for that evaluation and treatment regarding whether someone is competent to stand trial to happen at multiple different locations. I think what you'll hear is there may be a backlog of people waiting for competency evaluations. And so this would allow that evaluation to happen over electronic means in certain circumstances where that's appropriate and at a different variety of locations throughout the state.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Neely.
Sorry. I'm glad you just said that, because reading through this, I thought we had just heard this session about the backlog for Osawatomie, Larned, etc., and that it was extreme, and this giving dates to get into that and everything. Is that what this is trying to cure?
I believe that's part, and I'll let the proponents and opponents talk to you about what the bill's kind of trying to do. But I think the purpose of these statutory changes would be to allow these evaluations to take place at different locations, but then put in certain restrictions and criteria that have to be met if they're going to be conducted on an outpatient basis, on an inpatient basis at these variety of facilities.
Any other questions for Natalie? Okay, thank you. Come get a drink. Proponents, Scott Bruner is up first, and Scott is on WebEx.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the flexibility to be on remotely today. My name is Scott Bruner. I'm the Deputy Secretary for the Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Services. I work with our state hospitals. We are the proponent, and this is a bill that came about at our suggestion as well. The revisor did a great job at explaining it, and I appreciated the initial questions about the why and what this bill does. Hopefully I can shed a little light on that as well. So I've got some written testimony for you. It really covers three main points. One, what the problem is that we're trying to address with House Bill 2697. I did want to talk second about some additional resources that are in the governor's budget that we think complement what's in the bill and efforts that we're trying to take to address the backlog for competency evaluations. And then maybe just highlight a few things in the bill. Again, the revisor did a great job, but we kind of tie those things together of how this helps us address the problem that we're facing. So in my testimony, the first paragraph tries to just lay out the competency process as it exists today. KDADS oversees the operations at Wyandotte State Hospital, which includes the state security program. I'll refer to it as SSP from time to time, but that's the state security program and hospital at Wyandotte that serves as the primary treatment location for defendants referred by criminal courts in Kansas. When a defendant's not competent to stand trial, KSA 22-3302 allows a judge to commit that defendant to the state security hospital at Wyandotte and a couple of other locations that the revisor mentioned to have their competency evaluated. If that defendant goes to Wyandotte, the staff there reviews their symptoms and conditions and writes a report back to the court providing an opinion about the defendant's ability to participate in their defense and criminal case. If the defendant isn't competent, the court can then commit the defendant pursuant to KSA 22-3303 back to the state security hospital or some other locations as well that current law specifies to receive competency restoration treatment. The restoration treatment's goal is to restore that defendant's competency so they can stand in the court and face their criminal charge and address whatever mental health condition they have that's in the way of that. Under current law, if the defendant can't be restored to competency, the Secretary of KDADS is directed to file a care and treatment case and move that defendant into our psychiatric services program or the more traditional involuntary commitment path at our state hospital at Wyandotte or Osawatomie State Hospital for involuntary care and treatment. The problem with that structure, there's no problem with the structure in and of itself, but one of the problems that's created is about capacity at Wyandotte. And so relying on Wyandotte State Hospital has led to long wait times for defendants to access both that evaluation and restoration treatment. At Wyandotte, we've got 120 beds available, or 120 beds authorized for the state security program for referrals from district courts. That includes males and females. And a few things have made those 120 beds unable to all be accessed at the same time. COVID's had an impact on that. We've had to maintain an isolation and quarantine space for defendants that are remanded to Wyandotte, and that's reduced. And I put in my testimony kind of what that's reduced the numbers to. Staffing is an issue as well, and I have a couple of statistics in there about our vacancy rate for the direct care staff and nursing staff. So between the isolation space, limits on staffing, we just aren't able to use all of those beds. And so our effective capacity through most of this fiscal year has been somewhere between 75 and 78 out of that 120 beds that are available. Those reductions in capacity have have increased the number of defendants waiting for treatment at Wyandotte and the amount of time they spend waiting. And there's a couple of graphs on the second page of my testimony that illustrate this over time. The number of defendants waiting to receive treatment at Wyandotte increased from 118 to 167 between January 2020 and December 2021. The time those defendants have spent waiting for admission also increased from 270 days to 336 days between July 2020 and December 2021. That's a lot of people waiting, and a lot of them are waiting almost a year for admission to Wyandotte for either that evaluation to be conducted or restoration treatment. Those wait times slow the process for defendants to be evaluated and restored to competency, and defendants are waiting for treatment waiting for treatment and admission to Wyandotte in county jails at the county's expense, and it's at times without any access to mental health treatment. Those delays slow down the criminal process for those defendants and just generally cause issues for the criminal justice system. And I'm sure other conferees will talk about that as well. So we're trying to address with this bill that delay, both in the number of people that are waiting and the amount of time that they have to spend waiting. On the third page of my testimony, One way Larnett's tried to reduce that waiting time, or at least address it, is certainly recruiting and trying to get enough staff. But as a second path, we've implemented a program called Mobile Forensic Evaluation. So the State Security Hospital uses providers under contract with Larned to perform evaluations, and in some cases provide competency restoration services within secure confinement settings or in the community. In September 2019, we implemented this mobile evaluation process using a contractor that works for us at Larned. And during fiscal year 2021, our mobile evaluators completed 24 evaluations in 21 different counties. And since we started the program, we've completed over 50 mobile evaluations. Those are all people that never had to come to the Larned campus, be transported there, or spend any time there. We did that largely the competency evaluation in the jail where that defendant was originally placed. Larned continues to work with Kansas counties, courts, jails, and other community stakeholders to try to expand services so that we can serve people that are waiting admission to the State Security Hospital. We think increasing mobile competency orders, working with courts and judges to order that as a path, we can reduce wait times for people waiting to get to Larned, reduce the amount of transportation that has to happen, and hopefully some costs for counties. In terms of the resources, in the governor's 2023 budget recommendation, there's an additional $2.8 million from the state general fund to allow us to expand the pool of providers that can do mobile competency. We could work with other vendors if we could identify them, or our community mental health center partners around the state to do some of the competency evaluation work without having people wait to get to Larned State Hospital. So we're excited about the opportunity those additional resources will create. By specifically investing funds to reduce the waiting time for evaluation and restoration, criminal cases will move more quickly through the process and hopefully reduce the need to house people that are mentally ill in jails. And reducing the backlog in cases will help free up space at Larned for more severe cases and for the defendants that are criminally committed to Larned State Hospital. House Bill 2697 fits directly into that effort, our existing effort for mobile competency and the additional resources by allowing there to be some additional paths and additional providers that can do the competency evaluation and competency restoration work. And as the revisor said, the bill amends KSA 223302 to allow courts to order that forensic evaluation to happen at the State Security Hospital, a state hospital, which is current law, or our agents, which would specifically identify contractors working for the state hospitals to do that work. It would also authorize other appropriate state, county, or private institution or facilities, and that's where the resources could fit in to help some of those other locations perform those evaluations. The bill then further amends to allow the evaluations to be conducted in person or by electronic means, which opens up the possibility to, and even in our mobile competency pilot, we do some of that through televideo, where we don't even have to have a person go to the jail. We just complete it over televideo, and the bill would allow that more explicitly in statute. There's a couple of other changes in that first section that would reduce the number of physicians or psychologists a court could appoint or would have to appoint to evaluate a case. So district courts can appoint a physician or psychiatrist in their jurisdiction to conduct those evaluations. Right now, it requires two physicians or one of each, a physician and psychologist. The bill amends that to just authorizing only needing one. And then it does work on the timeline that the competency evaluation has to be completed within 60 days of when somebody's admitted to a location for that evaluation to be completed, again, to keep the timeline moving going forward. That's a big part of the bill, to get the evaluation process moving faster and also use more available providers or build a larger provider network to do that. The bigger changes are in section 223303 in section 2 of the bill, which really creates an outpatient path for competency restoration that doesn't exist in state law today. As the revisor said, what section 3303 in current law authorizes is that courts order defendants to Larned State Hospital or another state hospital for competency restoration. What we envision in the bill is keeping that system in place primarily for felony defendants, but others who need it, who failed on an outpatient basis, but create a second path that would authorize folks to do that competency restoration and evaluation on an outpatient basis in jails, working with mental health centers and other providers to make that another path. Again, the concept is more people doing this work would reduce the need to go to Larned, the transportation time it gets to Larned, and just the backlog of folks that are there. On the third page of my testimony, and I will try to wrap up shortly after this explanation, but we do have a pilot project in Shawnee County. That's that's our largest expansion of mobile services to date. We are using mobile competency to perform competency restoration in the Shawnee County Jail. We're working with the county jail, with Vallejo, the Community Mental Health Center, the district court, to identify defendants that could be have their competency restored while they're still in the Shawnee County Jail. They don't need to be transported to Larned. We identified 4 defendants that started in the program. It's led by a psychologist that works for us at Larned State Hospital, but lives on the eastern side of the state. So he does it as he's driving back and forth from home to Larned. And they provide that restoration service while the defendants are still in jail. So far, of the 4 that we started with, 2 have really cooperated with treatment, and the reports are being written to the court about their restoration status. 1 defendant wasn't successful, and so we moved him to Larned State Hospital for inpatient restoration, and the 4th is continuing that treatment path at the Shawnee County Jail. We think this is a good example of the kind of partnership that could make this work and serve defendants where they are, as opposed to having to move them to Larned. The bill certainly creates that path and other opportunities to do that with some specificity about the process and timelines. Maybe I jump down to the section that I titled Additional Improvements in House Bill 2697 in the second paragraph. One of the key things the bill does is, as you're in that outpatient treatment path, if the defendant that you're working with is initially screened and would be a good candidate for receiving competency restoration in the jail, but things don't work out or don't work well, we do want to make sure that defendant can get to Larned, get the inpatient care that they need, and we don't break too much of that process in the meantime. The way we tried to address that in the bill was by putting some timelines in for notification if the outpatient treatment path is being ended, and communication between the provider doing that outpatient treatment and the state security hospital, so that we can be working on making sure there's a bed available, that we can organize the transportation and admission, and not delay or unnecessarily delay that defendant's treatment or restoration or criminal process going forward. So we are trying to address in the bill, again, the intent certainly is to have a clear path for inpatient treatment for defendants that need it, outpatient treatment where it can work, and if there's something that goes wrong, the inpatient is the backstop for those defendants in courts and jails as well. Just a couple of last comments. We've been working with a variety of stakeholders on this concept and bill, mobile competency generally, for a while. When we started talking about this bill, we did share the concepts with those stakeholders and got some really helpful comments and suggestions about ways to improve both the process and the bill. One concern in that kind of listening to stakeholders section on the bottom of page 3 was that some jails, sheriffs, mental health centers were concerned that this bill, by allowing courts to order defendants to an inpatient setting that's a jail or another service provider, not Wyandotte State Hospital, would just be shifting the funding burden from the county jail to that other provider that is the responsibility of Wyandotte State Hospital. That's certainly not our intent. We do want to create in the bill pathways for there to be other options than Wyandotte State Hospital. In the governor's budget, we're bringing funding to the table as well to help pay for that. One thing we did think to address in the bill might be to identify who the appropriate kinds of facilities that could do that outpatient treatment, what they would be, define appropriateness. That's not defined in the bill today or in current statute today. Just to make sure that appropriate identifies providers who are willing, We don't want to require a jail to do this work if they're not capable of doing it or willing to do it. So there might be some need to identify kind of what providers are the most appropriate, willing, and able to do that, even with additional resources. On the next to last page of my testimony, the other significant question that we've gotten is about the reviser's description. Well, it's what the bill says, that for defendants with a misdemeanor charge would be preferred or shall be identified in that outpatient treatment path as opposed to going to Larned. There have been some concerns about using the word shall as a requirement rather than an option to the court to define whether that defendant goes to an outpatient setting or Larned or another inpatient setting. Our intent in the bill was to create a clear path with a priority for more severe defendants with more severe crimes to go to Larned and receive that inpatient kind of intensive care and evaluation and treatment, and let lesser severe or defendants with lesser crimes stay closer to the community. Sheriffs, law enforcement, folks in the jail will know a lot more about defendants than we do at the state hospital and may know something that would indicate they wouldn't be a good candidate for that outpatient setting. So we think there may be a good rationale for changing that shall in the bill to may and give the courts more flexibility in that definition. And then the last comment that I wanted to make, Mr. Chairman, just about the kind of focus. We do believe the mobile competency or the outpatient competency work would help with the timeline and delays getting into Larned. On the last couple of pages of my testimony, I put the number of admissions to Larned in the state security program by county. And on page 4, there's a small table there that has counties listed in numbers. So one of the things we've identified in doing this work is that if you take the 6 most populous counties, that represents about 60% of the people that are waiting to get into Larned State Hospital. And like I mentioned, we've got a pilot program in Shawnee County that has a willing court, a willing jail, a willing mental health center. If we can build some more of those kinds of partnerships in more populous counties where there are larger numbers of defendants waiting, we think that can move those defendants through where they are and frees up the demand on Larned. So there may be some need to, again, we don't want to leave anybody out that would want to have a willingly participate or want to participate in mobile competency, but there's clearly a need in some counties more than others, and we can identify ways of targeting resources to meet those needs where people are. On the last page, there's a graph that just shows that kind of distribution statewide. I'm happy to answer questions about that. We're very happy to have a hearing on the bill today. We think it's an important discussion to have for our state and courts, jails, sheriffs, to make sure we are being heard and trying to come forward with the solution that to address this very real problem of the wait to get into getting defendants through the forensic process to stand trial. Mr. Chairman, I'd stop there and stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Very good. Thank you. Committee, we'll do questions for Mr. Bruner at this point in time, and then I'm going to have the other proponents all testify, and then we'll do questions from them at the end. I just don't want to get too far from Mr. Bruner and you forget your good question. So Representative Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Bruner, for your testimony. I did the best I could keep up with you. I did, in the course of your testimony here, you mentioned area mental health centers several times, but I was particularly interested in your mention of using mental health centers in competency restoration. And I'm wondering if anywhere in this proposal, it is proposed that community or area mental health centers can perform the competency evaluations themselves, particularly if they're ordered by a court.
That's an excellent question. There are some community mental health centers that do work with courts to perform evaluations today. One of the things we've talked about with the mental health centers, as we've had some stakeholder conversations, is a process to identify a training program or certification that might have some national or evidence-based criteria to provide some training to folks so we could build this capacity out, not assuming it exists today. So I do, and maybe there are some mental health center representatives on that can talk more about what the capacity is, but we do see this as an effort. We know we need to build the capacity to do it in communities. Not every mental health center's prepared to do it, but we want to bring resource to the table and talk about that. One of the values of our mobile competency pilot is using the staff at Larned who do this work every day, who are highly skilled at it, both to train and act as mentors, be clear partners in the process, and we want to continue that going forward as well.
Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Bruno. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to read the testimony of an opponent to this legislation from the Disability Rights Center of Kansas. Have you yet had an opportunity to review that?
I did. They shared it with me earlier this afternoon, and I skimmed it. I don't know that I committed it to memory, but I did read through it.
My question is, if I understand their testimony correctly, they are expressing concerns about the involuntary administration of psychotropic medications to patients. And I wondered if you could explain to us how and under what circumstances that occurs now, and how, if at all, this legislation changes the present practices.
How it occurs now at Larned, if we've got a defendant committed to the state security hospital for restoration, and they've gone through the first 90-day process, and they're moved into a care and treatment case, so now they're involuntarily committed to the state hospital. At that point, we can administer some medications over objection for the patient's safety. And that's really the only time we can do that. One of the obstacles, the restoration treatment to bring people back into competency has a couple of elements to it. It's probably much more customized than I'm going to describe it, so I apologize for that. But some of it is therapy with the individual, either in a group or individually. But medication's an important part of that as well. And if so we did include in the bill that a broader use of medication over objection for some of the other providers we're trying to identify, just so that options on the table to help bring people back into competency within medical guidelines and other provisions, so we don't want to violate anybody's license or anybody's authority to prescribe going forward. In reading the DRC's testimony, I think they raise a couple of good points about the Supreme Court's requirements around involuntary medication, and would be happy to. That's probably my fault for not including them earlier in the process, so we could have had them kind of vet the language before we submitted. But happy to continue that work and try to address some of those concerns. We certainly don't want to create a problem in the process of trying to solve something. We don't want to create another problem. So if that's something we need to address, or would be happy to have an ongoing conversation.
So in your judgment, should we delay advancing this bill so as to resolve those concerns, or should we just go ahead and pass the bill right now in its present form? What would be your recommendation to the committee?
I think you could separate out that involuntary medication section of the bill from the other components. I do think it would help. Again, in talking to other stakeholders, that's one thing that they value about what the state hospital can do as involuntary medication. But I think it's separable from the other components of the bill. Would be others may have other thoughts about that, but that would be my suggestion.
And I might mention, I think the concerns also extend to the pre-commitment stage, the pre-competency determination stage. So I hope our other conferees can address that during the course of their testimony and save additional questioning by your ranking member, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question just has to do with the mobile forensic evaluation. And so just out of curiosity, you said that you completed 50 evaluations since its inception. When was that? So how often do you do that? And, 24 during FY21. So that was for a whole year. You did 24.
We conduct about 4 a month has been our pace since 2019. More closer to 4 in the more recent time period. Not as many early on, but now our pace is about 4 a month.
And
For mobile
what keeps it
evaluations.
from being, more than that, just to help that backlog?
COVID didn't help. So to get our evaluators either into a jail where that was necessary, or where a televideo session wouldn't work with the defendant, that's been one of the obstacles. We've actually got, I think it's 20 counties, 21 different counties that we're working with, which is up, I think, by 5 or 6 over the course of this fiscal year. So we've got a lot of partnerships with counties to do the work. It is a little bit of provider availability, and then a defendant that it fits to do a mobile review, that they're willing to participate, they're willing to be part of that process to get the evaluation complete.
And do you know if Sedgwick County is one of those 21 counties?
It is. I don't know how many we've actually completed in Sedgwick County, but I could get that information for you, Representative.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions, committee? Okay, let's move on to Eileen Berquist.
So, Chair Patton, unfortunately, I cannot take my video off, so I hope it's all right if I just do this with speaker today.
That's perfectly fine.
Thank you. I appreciate it. As we have heard, there is a very dire situation going on with the backlog of people waiting for competency evaluation and restoration services. As we also have heard under current law, those individuals who need those services must receive those services at Larned State Hospital. However, due to staffing shortages at the state hospital, people are waiting for very long periods of time, sometimes for 11 months or more. And in some cases, we have heard that individuals are spending more time in jail awaiting their evaluation or restoration services than they would have convicted on their underlying charges. So during this wait, individuals are often held in county jails that are not equipped to handle complex mental health needs. And many individuals may be held in solitary confinement or refuse medication, which can further compound mental distress. So as you can see, the situation is dire, and this bill does take important steps, but we worry that it's not a complete solution to the problem. Specifically, the ACLU supports the provisions that expand options for mobile evaluation or telehealth evaluations that would hopefully reduce the wait times. And that would also expand the type of service providers authorized to provide these services. Our concern is that this would be more of a Band-Aid to a very broken system. We hope that additional work will be done by this committee and the legislature as a whole to look into other solutions. We also encourage community-based evaluation and restoration services for those individuals who can be safely treated in the community. And because people wait so often, we hope that we will give as much care as we can to the fact that this could be a violation of due process rights. So there are a lot of complex issues at play here, and there are some good solutions in this bill, but maybe not the entire picture. So I thank you for the time today.
Thank you. Next, we have Marc Dupree.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all of the committee persons. I'm Marc Dupree, Wyandotte County District Attorney, and I am for this bill. I would like to direct you to my testimony, the second page, the second from the last paragraph, where we have respectfully. I have a number of 180 in there. That number should be 270, and I am resubmitting an updated version of that, so please forgive the grammatical error. Here's what I want to say real quickly that I haven't heard is the reason why we are in support of this is for victims. At the end of the day, as prosecutor, my job is to, one, make sure that the community is safe, but two, to try to fight for justice and closure for our victims. We have been tracking here in Wyandotte County since 2009 the amount of bed space and time that it takes for individuals to get out of our county jail, as well as for them going to Larned in that stay. Since 2009, the stay was, or rather the wait was 134 days. And as of late, we are up to 328 days that it takes for an individual who goes into our county jail on a case and then is waiting to get to Larned. This is extremely important to note because this is not the process by which the individual has been known, has done the evaluation, and therefore they need the treatment, but this is simply waiting to get the evaluation. As many of you know, in order for the case to proceed, the evaluation has to be done if competency is questioned, and then if there is treatment that must be undertaken, then the court process is on hold until that process is done. And if that individual is able to be restored and brought back to the county by which they were taken from, then the case picks up. Well, that entire time, my office is talking with the victims and talking with the families and trying to make sure that they understand the process. So the first issue that we run into on our end is really trying to make sure our victims understand that this process may take very long. And that's not a good conversation to have, especially when you're dealing with someone who's experienced some of the most traumatic and heinous crimes that some of the individuals, sadly, in our county has experienced. The second thing that I really want to pull out is that one of the very difficult things as prosecutors we have to deal with is our witnesses and cooperation. Again, time is not on our side. The longer we wait on cases, the more likely witnesses disappear, the more likely we have victims who say they don't want to go back to that traumatic experience in their lives. And so now, as the Minister of Justice in these counties, we have to make a decision. Do we dismiss a case because now we don't have witnesses, or because we don't have a victim who's wanting to go back to that psychological state of mind? Here's what I would love to happen. I would love to be able to pursue justice for every victim in our county, to pursue justice for every situation that we need to, but while at the same time making sure that these individuals who are accused at the time to receive the help and the assistance that they need so that we can move forward with the case. Having mobile competency as well as mobile treatment will absolutely speed that process up. And it is a process that I am wholeheartedly behind, and I believe that you all should pass this bill, not simply because it makes fiscal sense, but it makes sense for our victims and for the defendants as well, because many of them have stayed there way longer than sometimes the actual underlying sentence, as someone else have recently said. So that's all that I have at this point. I will stay on for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next, Sheriff Armbruster.
All right. Thank you, representatives. This is my first time testifying, so I've got a filthy mouth and I apologize ahead of time. I've submitted testimony. I'm sure you've all got it. Mr. Dupree and I actually are coming from a very similar standpoint. I want to provide the human aspect of this and not just the sheriff's aspect. So I'm just a cop. I started with the sheriff's office when I was 22 years old. I've worked my way all the way from a $9 jail job up to sheriff, worked everywhere. I've been inside this system. I've seen the breaks. I've seen the fixes. This one has just gotten to the point where we got to do something, and this bill is just the first step. So the wait list for Douglas County, we currently, and I made a mistake, I wrote 9 on here. We actually have 13. We just happen to have 9 in custody. Of those 9, one of them, who attempted to kill his own mother, has been in my jail for almost a year, waiting to go for evaluation, not restoration, evaluation. Then another gentleman who just stabbed and killed a man outside of the Dillons in Lawrence, and the man's dog, is 150 some odd on the waiting list. And they're taking about, from what I can tell, and these are not these are not hard numbers, just what I can tell, about 15 people a month. So that guy's waiting a year in my jail. He is extremely resource intensive. He is extremely dangerous. So, and I happen to have a jail with mental health staff, medical staff on scene all day. There's 105 counties. I'd venture there's about 95 of them that aren't as lucky as I am, if not more. So we talk about the pilot program. I listen to Mr. Bruno, Deputy Secretary Bruno. It's all great. Douglas County has the most people on the list. We weren't included in the pilot program. I think we're the 21st of those 21 counties that are now participating because we just finally got asked. So we've been trying to make this happen, but it's just been a really long process. I am passionate about this. I know it's nobody's fault, and I certainly do not blame anybody at Wyandotte State Hospital. Those poor people out there are doing the Lord's work that in a thankless and difficult situation. I want to talk about Isaac. Isaac spent 6 years, a month short of 6 years, in either my jail or in Wyandotte State Hospital. And when he was finally able to get competency, he took a plea for 16 months. He served 6 years of a 16-month sentence. He got credit for 2,100 and some odd days, and he was only sentenced to 16 months. If he was a Capers employee, he would have been vested. So, and people talk about, well, how do these people just end up in this system? How did Isaac just sit there for 6 years? Who was fighting for him? And in my testimony, I lay out the timeline about he was sent back and forth to Wyandotte 3 different times. And we've talked about the force, we call it forced medication. I can't remember, something about over-objection. The county jail, we do not and cannot, and I will not force medications. Somebody says, I'm not taking it. I'm not taking it. Had a guy that he needed a Haldol shot, wouldn't take it. I offered him a Baconator, and that's what he wanted. I wanted him to take a shot. And when we got there with the shot, he said, nah, never mind, I'm too fat anyways. So we do everything we can to get these folks to be healthy, but all we can really do is sit on them. And it's inhumane, it's unfair. So, and then how did somebody get to sit there for 6 years? I don't know Isaac's family situation, but what I do know is anecdotally, families who have a severely mentally ill person, they have dealt with this their entire lives. Picture a parent who has a child with a severe mental illness, and that child is now 20. I think Isaac was like 23 or 4. Now 24. They have spent their entire lives trying to get him better, keep him safe, and make sure he doesn't hurt somebody. And then finally something happens, and I'm not going to lie to you, they're actually glad that he's going to jail sometimes. That person is going to jail because they know he's going to get help, he's going to get services, he's going to be safe, and people are going to be safe from him. So there's a group of parents who are embarrassed to admit that I'm glad my child is in jail because it's the best place for them. However, I get that. That's not the best place for him. A jail is not a mental health institute. Did you guys know that LA County in California just built a mental health wing to their jail? It holds 4,500 people. It is now the largest mental health facility in the world. LA County. Mental health has got to get fixed in this country, especially in this state and in my county. I'm no different than any other county, though. Let's see, going through all this. And like I said earlier, I'm really here to fight for the other counties. I have a lot of resources that they do not. And I've talked to other sheriffs, and we talk about what they have to do if they have somebody. We talk about the needs of, and when I talk about how we have somebody who does this, that, or the other, they say, and it was a central Kansas county says, we would lock him in a cell and just sit there and stare at him and hope he doesn't kill himself. Whereas we have some options. So I go back to the point of this is just the first step. If you want to hear my ideas on how to make it better, build another hospital. Build one up here in the Kansas City metro area where you have a robust employee pool. Wyandotte is overworked, underpaid. They can't find good staff, and they're just burned out. I mean, I cannot imagine. And they are they're in a hole they cannot climb out of. So, and even with restoration, mobile restoration, come into my jail, do whatever you want to do, they're still going to be buried. That's all there is to it, because they handle acute cases as well as competency cases. So I say the state ponies up some cash, builds another hospital in this end of the state, give those people the relief they need, and get these people out of jail where they don't belong. So I've submitted my testimony. It's all in there. You can reach out to me. I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time, sounds like. But other than that, I made it through. I actually had to rewrite my testimony because I had the term bullshit in it. And they said, well, we believe this may be highly unusual, if not something or other. And I said, well, that's me. I'm highly unusual. So that's that. I appreciate you all listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Randy Kallstrom.
Hi, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Randy Kallstrom. I'm the president and CEO of Wyandotte Center, the community mental health center in Wyandotte County. And we have been doing evaluations for competency at the request of the courts for a number of years. But as has been shared already this afternoon, we are not able to help in the restoration treatment. We do support this bill, that we believe that there are some individuals that can be safely treated locally in terms of their restoration, and help address all of the issues and challenges that others have testified to already. This week, there are 17 individuals waiting to go to Larned in the Wyandotte County Jail, and we think this can be a part of the process to help alleviate that stress. We're very interested in working with the courts, with the sheriff's office to make this happen where we can in a safe way. There are some issues or caveats that I have to that. Many of them have already been addressed by Mr. Bruno and others. One is training. The training for restoration treatment is a really critical component of this, as this is typically beyond the scope of what community mental health centers are doing. And there's a lot of training, a lot of interest around what that would look like, but we think that it is possible to be done at a local level. Secondly, and this is something that also was testified to by Mr. Bruno, it really does require locally driven decisions. I believe in Wyandotte County, and I believe Mr. Dupree would agree, we have a good network of collaboration between the judicial system and the mental health center. That may or may not be true in every location. We may be willing and able to provide some services, evaluations, or restoration treatment that just for a variety of reasons may not be possible in other locales. So that may versus shall that Mr. Bruno referenced, I think, is a very critical component of this. But the biggest question is the medication over objection and how that can be done safely, locally, or can it be done safely on a local basis, and who would bear the legal authority and responsibility for that? I think that is a significant question that really has not yet been determined. And there may be others that through other forms of restoration treatment, even though they may not be willing to seek medication, perhaps the therapy, whether it's individual and group therapy, may be sufficient for them. And there may be some that would be willing to take medication through a variety of resources. But the one issue that I also want to leave you with is the language in the bill. The current bill and the one that's being proposed is specific to psychologists. And I think probably everybody in the room today knows there's a significant workforce shortage really across America among every industry. And certainly in the community mental health center in the world, we're all struggling around workforce. And psychologists is very limiting. What I would propose as a consideration is to use the language of a community, a qualified mental health professional, which is already defined in a different statute. Essentially, that means a licensed mental health professional, including a social worker, a marriage and family therapist who is employed by a community mental health center. and has received the proper training essentially to provide the restoration treatment would expand the opportunities at a local level in order to provide the restoration treatment or the evaluations. And then finally, the question that Mr. Bruno mentioned earlier about payment is one of the questions that is being discussed among the mental health centers in terms of the ability to participate and help in this service. And that would conclude my very brief testimony. Do support this bill with those considerations.
Thank you. Committee, any questions for the other proponents? Representative Humphreys?
Thank you. This was okay. Randy Kallstrom's okay. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. You said other, and I didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. Other.
Okay. So just just out of curiosity, how long does a screening take, or that's not what it's called, an evaluation take? The competency evaluation.
Yeah, we're doing those evaluations in around 3 hours. 3 hours to a day. It depends on a number of factors, obviously.
Okay, and then I'm sure that it varies greatly, but is there a time frame for restoration? About how long is that?
I am not really able to respond to that question and would defer to another proponent who may have more accurate information than I do.
Does anyone have an answer to that question? Mr. Bruner, it looks like you're looking for your mute button.
So within the existing statute, there's 90 days identified. And then at the end of that first 90 days, the court can authorize a second 90 days. And then after that, if the person's not restored, then that's when the involuntary care and treatment case would be filed. And those are the guidelines that are in statute to keep the person moving through the court process. I think our experience, there are a lot of variables, but using the Shawnee County pilot that we've done, I think those first couple of individuals that we restored on a mobile basis in the Shawnee County Jail, that was something on the order of a month, 30 days or 40 days or so of weekly sessions and some other interventions. But I'd hesitate to say that's typical, but 90 days are the timelines that are set up in the statute.
Okay, so I just have to ask, if the backlog to, even get evaluated is like days and days, and it just takes 3 hours, and you have a mobile unit and you have 30 people waiting in Sedgwick County, is there some reason we can't just, what keeps you from just getting at least the evaluations done? Or is the backlog really in placing people in the restoration? But, what's the hold up if you can only do 4 a month when they just take 3 hours?
The volume in terms of the overall wait list, represented the about 20% of the people that are waiting for an evaluation. The other 80% are waiting for restoration. So in terms of the wait time at Larned, I would say it's more related to getting in for restoration. Again, I think with more resource, I did verify with the team at Larned. We've done 2 mobile competencies that in Sedgwick County. We tried a different path with Sedgwick County and did what we call the same day evaluation, where we worked with the jail to bring 5. I don't think it was on the same day, but overall we brought 5 defendants to Larned, evaluated them all on the same day and sent them back. So we've tried a couple other things for Sedgwick County because it's close, but I think it's a resourcing issue, primarily what the vendor has available to do and some of the standards that we want to hit. But that's certainly part of it too. We want to increase capacity to do more of that what's in the governor's budget will help us address that as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions, committee? We do have written proponent testimony from the Kansas Mental Health Coalition. Any other proponents? Okay, let's move on to neutral. Sandy Horton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I have submitted written testimony. I'm just going to briefly go over each one of those highlighted categories. First, I want to say, though, that we're certainly not opposed to the concept of this bill. We do appreciate Scott and all the folks at KDADS and the work that they've done the past several months in involving us in these conversations and providing us information when we would ask for it. We do feel like we're providing neutral testimony because we feel strongly there are some amendments needed to this bill, at least in our perspective, in our opinion. When you look at the associated cost involved right now, KDADS is pretty much paying for that because they're being done by KDADS at Larnder for the most part. We think there needs, I know that Scott mentioned that they have money proposed in the governor's budget, but we feel strongly that it's one thing to have it in the budget. It's another thing to keep it in the budget from year to year. And it should be a statutory requirement that if these services are provided at a local level, no matter who's providing them, it should be required as a statutorily required to be paid by the state. Another thing that we want to look at is the potential for orders directing jails to perform certain things they cannot do. And when you talk about the competency of mobile evaluations, that is a fantastic idea, and I think it's going to grow more and more. But the jails have to be capable of doing this right now. Have to have the electronic audio-visual means to do it remotely. The defendant has to be willing to do it, and in some cases they're not. But when you talk to the treatment side, that's where we start getting into some real concerns. There are 97 jails in Kansas. The 6 metropolitan jails can probably do some or most of actual treatment on these individuals, but most of our smaller jails would not be able to do treatment at their locations. It's mentioned throughout the bill, chief medical officer. Most jails don't even know what a chief medical officer is because they don't have one. 26 or 27 contract for medical care from a private outside source. Several have local community health, but most of them just have a local doctor's office with a nurse that comes in on a frequent basis for that reason. So we feel there should be language in there of some sort that says the sheriff or jail administrator must agree to this concept, to not only the mobile competency evaluations, but treatment, that they must agree that they have the capability and the means and the staffing to be able to actually pull this off. Court can order issue orders to sheriffs to perform these duties, but for the most part, most of the sheriffs probably can't. So we feel there should be some kind of language in there that has the sheriff mention of the jail administrator that confirming that their willingness to participate on more of just a voluntary or assumption of that. When you talk about the misdemeanor charges, we had a conversation with Scott a couple of days ago. I think they said there were 10 or 11 folks on the waiting list that were on misdemeanor charges being held in jails. Clearly, if the court felt like there needed to be some kind of competency evaluation or restoration of this individual for their case to move forward, to us, it doesn't matter what they're charged with or what degree of felony or what degree of misdemeanor. There's a reason that person's involved in this system. There's a reason the court is asking for this to happen. And it shouldn't really matter whether it's a misdemeanor or felony. It's an individual. And if you want to look at true fairness and equity in this regard, I think I don't even believe that the misdemeanor section should even be included. I think it's also important when you look at assurance of consistent and quality evaluations and treatment that, and I think Scott did mention part of this, that if an inmate does deteriorate to the point that proper care cannot be provided locally, whether in the jail or another facility, that the court shall order that person directly to the state hospital facility for treatment. And Another thing we feel like there should be a clarity of concern all through the statute, current statute, and all through this bill, county institution or facilities are mentioned. We feel like it should be specifically mentioned when appropriate, the county jail, because a county institution could be a county mental health center, county hospital. There's a lot of things that a county institution could be other than just a jail. And if these concerns are addressed and satisfactorily addressed in these amendments, we would be in full support and a proponent of this bill. But those are the positions we feel are important that we bring forth to the committee for consideration.
Thank you. Next, and we'll be back for questions. Next, Michelle Ponce.
Hello, good afternoon, Chair Patton and members of the committee. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Michelle Ponce. I am the Associate Director of the Association of Community Mental Health Centers. We represent all 26 of the mental health centers located across the state, and we appreciate the opportunity to testify today. As you've heard from previous conferees, currently individuals awaiting competency evaluation and/or restoration are experiencing lengthy wait times. To alleviate this, the Legislative Mental Health Modernization and Reform Committee recently recommended that immediate action be taken and funding provided for community mental health centers to be able to conduct mobile competency and evaluation and restoration services. In addition, the governor, as mentioned previously, has recommended enhanced funding of $2.8 million. We support these recommendations, but we also do have some points of concern. Currently, our biggest challenge would be workforce. We estimate that potentially about 1/3 of CMHCs currently have the capacity to provide this service. These are very specialized services, and they must be provided by a qualified physician or psychologist who has the requisite training and experience. CMHCs are currently operating with, a fairly large vacancy rate across the system. In particular, there is a severe shortage of psychiatrists in Kansas, and recruitment for that position can often take multiple years. I also want to reiterate what some other conferees have mentioned, that there is absolutely a need for training. So we do hope that, or recommend that the state provide this training. And it is our hope that the remaining community mental health centers who may not have the capacity currently to do these services would be able to increase their capacity over the next few years if training and additional resources are provided to them. Also, similar to what some other conferees have already mentioned related to the language around may versus shall, we wanted to emphasize the language where it states appropriate facility or mental health center, in that we believe the term appropriate should be interpreted by those organizations themselves based on their assessment of their own individual capacity to provide the service. That is, we believe that CMHCs must retain the autonomy and authority to decide if and when they're able to provide mobile competency evaluation and/or restoration services. Lastly, I want to echo Sheriff Horton just briefly in that we want to ensure that nothing within the bill may be interpreted as passing on a new or additional financial obligation to local government or providers. We're thankful that the governor has recommended funding in her budget, but we still don't know yet really what that will equate to or how they propose that providers might be reimbursed for providing such services. We have a great working relationship with KDADS, and I would like to thank them for that. And hopefully we can work some of these points of clarification out as we move forward. Certainly, we support the underlying objective, which is really to ensure that individuals get access to these services and without having to wait the lengthy wait times that they do now. Thank you again, and I will take questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Next, we have Natalie Chalmers.
I was actually just giving written only testimony, but essentially our issue with the bill is that our office has been cut out. It says county and district attorney instead of prosecuting attorney, and so we need prosecuting attorney back. And then I would just remain on the written testimony. We are neutral, but would support amendments essentially.
Very good. Thank you, Natalie.
I would, of course, answer questions if you want them.
Sounds good. We also have written testimony from the League of Kansas Municipalities. Anyone else as a neutral conferee? Okay, committee questions for any of the neutrals? Okay, we'll move on to opponents. Lane Williams. Lane is on WebEx.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Can you see me okay and hear me okay?
We can, yes.
Good. And thank you, members of the committee, for providing me the opportunity to provide this testimony this afternoon. As our testimony states, we support the idea of expanding the options for providing the competency evaluations and the restoration treatment to expand from the current system that we have now, because we, as Mr. Bruno has stated, there's a dire need for more options available. And we do believe that local community, if set up correctly, local options are a good idea, and in many cases, outpatient treatment, particularly if an individual can be in the community while doing that treatment in order to avoid lengthy jail times. We do have concerns, however, which we believe, and we strongly believe, that it merits substantial review and consideration, and we would suggest that that the committee refer this bill to the Kansas Judicial Council for review, research, and for determination if and what changes should be made to the bill to strengthen it. The concerns that we've highlighted in the testimony, I'll just go through briefly. The first concern we have is, which I think has been addressed somewhat, is that the bill itself doesn't set out any qualification requirements for the expanded evaluators and treaters. We think that that's important. There have been a couple of different options, QMHPs and expanding from psychologists in some fashion. We think those need to be looked at very carefully. We think that the Judicial Committee could do that. Secondly, the second concern we raise is a change to KSA 22-3303. It's on page 4. It's in section 2. There are, I think, 5 or 6 different areas in which this one change appears throughout the proposed legislation. And this is, the first one's on line 12 through 15, where it states the court shall issue an order for care and treatment within 21 days of receipt of the certification of the chief medical officer of the institution or head of the facility, unless exceptional circumstances warrant delay. This is at the time when a defendant has been found not competent to stand trial, and then a determination has been made after attempts to restore competency that the individual is determined not to have the capacity to be restored in the near future, and therefore a petition for involuntary civil care and treatment is to be initiated by, right now it's by KDADS, and the amendment would expand that to also the county of origin. We believe this is directly contrary to the current limitations in the civil care and treatment statute, and I set it out in the testimony, which specifically excludes individuals who are found to have a mental disorder, but not due to mental illness, such as a brain injury or intellectual disability or a developmental disability that renders the person not able to make sound judgment and decisions. These individuals are currently not allowed to be committed civilly into on the civil, during a regular civil process, not related to the criminal process. They cannot be committed into the adult treatment center at Wyandotte or into Osawatomie because they don't meet the criteria for mental health disorder. They are also excluded currently by the Supreme Court, which recognized that that these individuals cannot be committed if they have been charged with a crime and found not to be competent to stand trial, except in certain situations, certain types of felony offenses. This essentially, as we read it, would essentially eliminate all exceptions to the civil care and treatment statute for people who don't have a mental health disorder. We think that's a huge problem because these individuals essentially would be committed for life without having their criminal case ever adjudicated. Another concern we've raised is that the proposed amendments give the court discretion to allow credit for time spent waiting for treatment or in restoration. We believe that should be mandatory. Regarding the administration of psychotropic medication and withdrawal of that medication prior to a court hearing, we believe that's a problem, considering that if the medication is being prescribed in order to make the defendant competent, but then is withdrawn, that's likely to render the individual not competent to stand trial. So it becomes circular, and we believe that needs to have further study. The fifth concern that we have, which has been raised by, has been noted by Mr. Bruno, is regarding the forced medication issue. That's in Section 3, and I have a typo in my testimony on page 3. First line of Section 5 is the statute should be 22-3303, not 4, and I apologize for that. Reviewing that section, it appears that it's very similar to the civil care and treatment statute that allows for forced medication when an individual in the civil side refuses medication. We believe those standards are significantly different, and set out the Supreme Court case, U.S. Supreme Court case, Selby U.S., which cites very specific factors which have to be found by the court in order to force medication. We don't see that currently in the statute, the proposed amendments to the statutes, which I think is a big problem. And I think it needs, for that reason, it needs to, well, certainly for the other reasons, but for this reason too, it should be further studied and revised to comport with Constitution. And finally, just to highlight the lengthy delays that are currently that defendants currently face, our position is that those are impermissible under law at this point, because they are so long, almost a year for everybody, for anybody who has to waiting to go to Larned at this time, based on Mr. Bruno's testimony, written testimony. We submit that any significant changes to increase the options for evaluations and treatment, there should be included in the statute a deadline for having those done. Thank you, and I stand for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Okay, don't see any. I will close the hearing on House Bill 2697. Committee, let's get to work on some bills. Before we get started on the bills, though, let me give you an update on what I'm thinking on a couple of them. The asset forfeiture bills we heard yesterday. My intent is to bring it back up to the Judicial Council to see if that subcommittee can come back to life and bring the players, the parties that were here yesterday, kind of back to the table and see what we can find to move that forward. I don't think that's something that is likely to move forward by us debating it around this table. And so let's bring that group back together. I visited with some of the proponents today and advised them that that's what I'm thinking, and they seem supportive of that. So that's the direction I think I'm going to head with that one at this point, or both of those. 2697, which we just heard, This is one that got to us in this building relatively late. Natalie, I think less than 3 weeks ago, started working on it. And it was late last Thursday that she was trying to finalize a draft. We got it introduced on the last day and we set it for hearing because I do believe it's something that we need to consider and certainly something worth discussing and hopefully doing in some capacity. I don't know what that may look like, but we're not going to get there by turnaround. I'm not sure we'll get there by the end of session, but I am going to ask the speaker to give us a little more time on that. That may be one we try to get blessed. And if the parties can come together, and I think they've all left on the screen, but if they're listening and they can come together and bring us something that may work, then we'll try to, if the speaker allows us to do so, deal with that after turnaround. If not, certainly open to judicial council or somehow bringing people together to continue tweaking that. So now let's look at 2652. And before Natalie tells you what 2652 is, my intent, if you're all okay with it, and we'll vote to see if 2/3 of you are okay with it, to suspend the rules. And I would like to put this in Senate Bill 286. Senate Bill 286 is a bill we heard last year. We actually had a companion. Well, hold on a second. Let me make sure I get that right. It ended up in a conference committee report, which passed. The governor ended up vetoing it, but it was the COVID Small Business Relief Act. So we have a shell sitting here. We have not had a hearing on that shell, and so that's why I'm going to ask your permission to do so. The reason I want to put it in a Senate shell is my understanding the Senate is willing to concur in this. It will make sure we meet the deadline of March 31st before those liability immunities go away, and so that way we don't have to worry about conferencing about it and butting heads and it not happening, and we go home for our break and then we have another lapse that we're not sure what happens when that happens. So anyway, I'll have Natalie explain 2652 and then we'll walk our way through that process of trying to get it in 286.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2652 would continue the governmental response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It would expand the use of telemedicine, the authority of the Board of Healing Arts to grant temporary emergency licenses. You'll recall that that's the provision that you guys can remove from this bill because that expiration date has already been extended. The suspension of certain requirements related to medical care facilities, and then the immunity from civil liability for certain healthcare providers, certain people conducting business in the state, and then certain covered facilities. It extends all those deadlines from March 31st of this year to January 20th of 2023.
Any questions for Natalie? Okay, Natalie, question for you from me. I have a technical amendment. Do you want me to do it now and then okay, so committee, I have a technical amendment that we will get distributed here in a second. What it does is we discovered as we were moving forward with this draft that there was a section that isn't needed. You'll get it here in a second. It was included in 2477. Is that the correct number? Yeah, we already dealt with it this session. So no, it wasn't a mistake. Right. It was just left. It's there and we dealt with it earlier. So we don't need it. So the amendment coming out will strike that section. Without seeing it, I guess I made my motion and Representative Hoheisel already seconded. And it is in your email box. Any discussion?
Can you just say which section?
Section 3. Section 3.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Motion carries. So now you want me to take the amended contents of 2652, remove the contents of Senate Bill. Oh, yeah. Okay. So let's wait. Make it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we waive the applicable rules of the committee and proceed to work SB 286 without the necessity of hearing or further notice.
Thank you. Second by Representative Hoheisel. Any discussion? Seeing none, Representative Carmichael, you can close on your motion.
I close.
Heard the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Motion carries. Okay. I will now make a motion to take the contents of House Bill 2652 as amended and put it, well, no. So my motion is to strike the contents of Senate Bill 286. insert the contents of House Bill 2652 as amended. Correct? Okay, that's my motion. Second by Representative Hoheisel. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. So now we're on the Senate Bill 286, correct? I know.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Representative Heiberger.
I have my positive vote recorded.
Yes, but that was actually just my amendment to move it into 286. So I think you're
I lost track there. Sorry.
no worries.
I was guilty as well, Boog.
Okay. So now I will make a motion to recommend House Substitute for Senate Bill 286 favorably for passage. Is there a second? Second by Representative Hoheisel. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor of my motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Those wanting their votes recorded: Hoheisel, Carmichael, Heiberger, O'Havison. All in the affirmative. Now let's look at here's my intention here. So 2556 and 2557. Natalie can explain both of them, and my hope is that we will put 2557 into 2556, add them together.
Mr. Chairman, House Bill 2556 would prohibit the denial of a petition for expungement due to the petitioner's inability to pay the outstanding costs, fees, fines, or restitution. And then House Bill 2557 would do the same thing for juvenile adjudications. It would also allow a juvenile adjudication if that juvenile hadn't committed a new offense in the previous 2 years.
Questions, Representative Keither, your hand is up.
Yes, it is. I know I can't vote because I'm sitting here from home, but I certainly am following along. I really like this idea because I worked on the Judicial Council for the juvenile section, the juvenile part of the bill, the 2557. So I think this is a good idea and get it all done in one fell swoop because I think they're good proposals. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Any other questions for Natalie? Okay, so then I'm going to make a motion to take the contents of 2557 and insert it into 2556. Is there a second? Representative Curtis. Discussion. None, all in favor of my amendment say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Motion carries. So now we're on 2556, which also includes 2557. Any additional amendments? Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to make a motion that we move House Bill 2556 out favorably.
As amended.
As amended.
Is there a second? Representative Owens. Discussion. Okay, Representative Curtis, you can close.
I close.
Heard the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. The affirmative votes being recorded: Hoheisel, Carmichael, Heiberger, O'Havison. Now let's take up 2575.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2575 would require certain records to be automatically expunged from a person's criminal record.
Any questions for Natalie? Not amendments? Representative Curtis?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I do have a couple of amendments. Perhaps there's two. One, we can start with the one that is courts. And you want me to go ahead and explain?
Yes, please.
So in their testimony, they had made a couple of suggestions on amendments. And this amendment actually incorporates their two recommendations. You should have it here in a minute. I'm sorry, the judicial branch, the courts.
Like to move your amendment? Is there a second? Representative Wheeler? Any discussion, committee? Sure. Natalie, would you like to explain to us what the words mean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the two changes that were recommended by the judicial branch, you'll see on page 2 at line 19, they wanted, instead of the word notify, they wanted the KBI to send a copy of that order to the FBI, the Secretary of Corrections, the appellate courts, and any other criminal justice agency that may have copies of those records. I believe what you heard in testimony was that that's already what happens, and so they just wanted to codify the current practice. And then on page 4, subsection D currently requires the appellate courts to go back and amend their decisions to remove reference to people's names once their records have been expunged. And so they ask that you remove that provision to not have competing opinions with Westlaw, Lexis, et cetera.
Any further discussion? Okay, Representative Curtis, you may close.
I close.
Heard the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Back to Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And a second amendment in testimony, we had some discussion with the district attorneys who Representative Wheeler and I worked with to come to some agreeable language. And so we have an amendment that reflects their agreements. They were concerned about a couple of things. They were concerned about the time frame, and then they were also concerned, and you'll see it when the amendment comes to you, about the written objection. So if we could distribute that so everybody could take a look at that language.
I think it's on its way. There it is. Okay, Representative Curtis, would you like to make your motion?
Sure. I would move that we amend House Bill 2575 with the amendment that was distributed.
Perfect.
And if Natalie could explain, that would be great.
Is there a second? Representative Wheeler? Natalie, would you like to explain further?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for the process commencing after July 1 of 2022, there wasn't a written objection provision for the prosecutors. You heard that they were concerned that those arrest records would be automatically expunged and they would not have the ability to object to that like they do for the ones going back. And so you'll see we add that those records would not be expunged. Currently, the bill provides that they wouldn't be expunged if the person objects or if an appeal is filed. We add a third one, which is that if the prosecutor files a written objection, and then we provide for a proceeding to take place. If the prosecutor does file that written objection, then the court would have to hold a hearing on that objection. If the court at that hearing finds that expungement would be appropriate, then they would order those records to be expunged in 30 days. And if not, then they would order the records not expunged at that time.
Any questions? Comments on the amendment? Okay, Representative Curtis, you may close. He was just scratching his head. I thought he was raising his hand.
I did too. I close. Thank you.
You heard the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. All opposed say no. Motion carries. Okay, any additional amendments? Representative Curtis? Oh, Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say and commend Representative Curtis for working on this for a few years now. This is a bill her and I, along with a couple other representatives, sponsored a couple years ago. She's worked hard in the meantime and finally got some language agreed to. So thank you, Representative Curtis, for all your work on this.
I would agree. And I appreciate not only the work you've done over the years, but just in the last couple of weeks to make sure we could get to the point today where we have an agreement. And yes, and Representative Wheeler. Okay, Representative Curtis, would you like to make a motion to recommend the bill out?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would recommend that we pass House Bill 2575 out of committee favorably. So passage as amended.
Is there a second? Representative Hoheisel, discussion? Seeing none, you may close.
I close.
For the motion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. The affirmative votes Hoheisel, Carmichael, Heiberger, Ohabism. Now let's look at 2364.
Mr. Chairman, House Bill 2364 would define torture for the purposes of the crime of cruelty to animals.
Any questions for Natalie? Are there any amendments? Is there a motion concerning 2364? Representative Carmichael.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we pass out HB 2364 favorably, and my apologies to my caucus. I left this bill off of our list of what we were doing today.
Is there a second? Second by Representative Neely. Discussion. Seeing none. Representative Carmichael, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I close and move the motion.
For the motion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. The affirmative votes Hoheisel, Carmichael, Heiberger, Ohabism. 2608.
Mr. Chairman, House Bill 2608 would remove provisions that authorize criminal restitution as a civil judgment. It would also authorize judicial districts to contract for collection services for criminal restitution.
Any questions? Are there any amendments? Okay, what's the pleasure of the committee on this one? Representative Wheeler?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is a good bill, and I move that we advance it favorably for passage.
Is there a second? Representative Owens. Discussion. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is probably necessary given the present status of the appellate law. I do have in my mind reservations, but I can't put a finger on it. And I do recognize that the case that gave rise to this is on petition for certiorari to the United States Supreme Court, and it may be that a year or two from now we see a decision from the Supreme Court that meant that this was not at all necessary. On the other hand, they may not accept cert, they might affirm, and in the meantime, we probably need to go ahead and do these collections. But I don't want to say that this is my wholehearted support, but I would say it's the best that we can do under the circumstance. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Representative Wheeler, you may close.
Mr. Chair, I close.
For the motion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Yes votes Hoheisel, Carmichael, Heiberger, and Ohabism. That's it, guys. Thank you. Oh, Representative Ralph.
As we've done maybe in a couple of sessions past, now we've got quite a stack of these. If you have something that you might like to carry, if you will email me, I don't know that you would get it, but that way the chairman doesn't have to direct you to carry something maybe you did not want to carry. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is nothing in reference to what the Vice Chair just said, because I don't want to carry anything. But I believe Representative Concanon still has a debt outstanding to the committee. Question for the reviser: at what point does she start incurring interest on that debt?
I feel like that's a rules question. The chair is
Mr. Rules Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I was here when that event allegedly happened, and despite what you think you heard, it didn't happen. I was here.
Thank you all for your good work. We'll have a good weekend. We'll see you next week.